Okay, this is Margot Palmer, and I'm interviewing my grandfather, Perry Rollet. So, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born Paul Perrin Rollet in June of 1934 at the Fifth Avenue Hospital in New York City. Uh, my mother and father came to New York in the 1928 or 29 in time for the Depression. And we lived there in New York until the early 40s when we moved to Virginia. My mother and father had come east from San Francisco, where grandfather Rollet had died by that time. Your great-great-grandfather. But your great-great-grandmother owned 5 or 6 hotels in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me any stories of what it was?
Well, I don't know where they lost them all in the fire.
Wait, we're not there yet.
Huh? You're not there yet?
Not yet, okay.
Well, my father was the youngest of 5 children. Do you want to hear that?
Sure.
There was my Uncle Harry, Harry Matthew Hippolyte Rollet. My father was Paul Bertrand.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother liked Napoleon, so a lot of the children were named after Napoleon's field marshals, Bertrand and Hippolyte. And I had 3 aunts, Leonie, Agnes, and Charles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they want to go back, Agnes was, all the children were born in San Francisco except Agnes. She was the oldest, and she was born in France. And when your great-grandmother and grandfather came over, they left Agnes in a convent in somewhere in France, I don't know where. And then after they had been here in the States for, I guess, a year or so, grandfather went back and brought Agnes over.
Mm-hmm.
He died of, well, they called it inflammation of the gout. We think that was probably appendicitis or something when he was pretty young. And at the time, they had invested in a lot of property in hotels.
Wait.
What?
Let her ask another
Okay.
question.
Have you got another question?
I got lots of questions.
Okay, well, go ahead. I'll give.
Okay, do you know if your grandparents, whether or not they stayed or left San Francisco after the 1906 fire?
Well, my grandfather was dead at the time.
Mm-hmm.
By then.
Did he die after the fire?
No, he died before the fire.
Okay.
The fire basically wiped him out.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the buildings in San Francisco.
You mean it wiped out his business?
Well, destroyed all but one of the hotels that grandmother had.
Mm-hmm.
And an interesting thing was a lot of insurance companies were German insurance companies, and when they saw what was happening to San Francisco, wait a minute. When they saw what was happening to San Francisco, you couldn't find an agent. They flew the coop. So grandmother basically collected very little insurance, and now the one insurance company that did pay their claim was the smallest one. Excuse me. Was the smallest one, and was called the Fireman's Fund, which later became a huge company. And they said that they weren't going anyplace. They couldn't pay all the full amount of the claims, but they would eventually pay them all.
Okay, ask the
Okay.
So your, well, go ahead. Your great grandfather, my father, would never have any insurance but Fireman's Fund.
Did,
He didn't care whether.
although your father was very young when the earthquake hit, did he ever tell you any stories about it?
Well, the one I remember the most was he was the earthquake was in 1908 or six. Six. He was 6.5 years old. He was born in 1899. The civilian population was mustered at the Presidio, which is an army base in San Francisco. And in charge of the army base then was a colonel named Jack Pershing, Black Jack Pershing, who was the leader of the American armies in the First World War. He was a general by then. I can remember Pop saying, I guess all the kids were going to the Presidio with a French nurse that grandmother had for him. And Pop said he can remember seeing the Chinamen coming up out of the manholes. The opium dens used to be down in the sewers of the manholes, and they didn't know what the hell was happening, so they they bailed out, and I don't know where they went, but so that was it. And I don't know, you know, how long they stayed in the camp at Presidio, and there was one hotel left called the Dorchester.
That's the one we have the menu for.
Which I think you have a menu with it.
Yeah.
Don't you have a copy of the menu?
Yeah.
Grandmother always had very good food and stuff in there. And that's about all. They were, I can remember my Uncle Harry and Pop saying that when French dignitaries would come through San Francisco to head out to their possessions in the Pacific, that they would always stop at grandmother's hotel.
Oh, so
So they must have been pretty prominent when they were in France. I don't know. One day maybe we'll find out.
so the Dorchester was the only hotel left?
That's the only thing left.
Out of how many hotels did he have?
6.
So out of 6 hotels, only
Yeah.
one was left after the fire.
And your great grandfather was born where the addition to the St. Francis Hotel is on
Union Square,
Union Square.
which is
I don't know that in that period in there. I know they moved up to Sebastopol, which is in the Napa Valley, and my father went to high school there. I'm not sure when your great grandmother on your mother's side, they came to San Francisco. Edward Park Schaefer. He was a chemist, And I think at the end he had one or two real drugstores, old-fashioned drugstores. They were Pennsylvania Dutch from, he went to some college in Philadelphia for pharmacy. And then, well, have you got any more questions?
Yeah. So, do you know anything about the state of Brittany, France when they left? Like what caused them to leave Brittany, France to move to San Francisco?
I really don't know what caused them to leave. The only thing we have is a letter from Agnes, the oldest child, that said that your great grandfather, his parents were evidently somewhat of the nobility and had huge land holdings in Brittany. When he died, it was all left to my grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, Charles Marie Rollet de Gouillon.
So he owned all of that, but he decided
Well,
to
we don't know how much land it was, but when he sold it or got rid of it, they were evidently very, very well off, and they went to Brussels, and they bought a hotel in Brussels, and evidently they didn't like Brussels, so they came back to France, and then they went over to London, and I don't know the reason for all this. They didn't like London that much. So they came over, went back to France, and then came over again through Canada to the U.S. And they came down from Canada, I don't know where in Canada, probably through Ellis Island. Everybody had to come in that way back then. And they, now it doesn't say in the letter, but your great-grandfather used to always say that as they were heading west, they stopped for a year in St. Louis, and your great-grandfather taught French or Latin at Washington University.
I thought it was at Columbia.
Well,
That's
some
wrong?
people say Columbia,
Oh, okay.
and
There's
we
family
don't know which it was.
discrepancy.
So,
And then they went to New Orleans to visit their friends, the de Lesseps. So they must have been well connected. The de Lesseps is the guy that built the Suez Canal. And then they went to San Francisco. And as I gathered, my grandfather died when he was pretty young. They must have been a huge amount of money.
Charles Rollet?
Huh?
Are you talking about Charles Rollet? He died when he was young?
It
Yeah.
was like
So-
45. I
So after he
He
died,
was in his 40s, I think.
so after he died and after the earthquake hit, did my great-great-grandmother maintain the Dorchester Hotel? Did she maintain the business?
Yeah.
Well, what was left of it, she
Uh-huh.
took the family up to Sebastopol, where my father went to high school.
So,
Now they came back, I guess, to San Francisco, because
She built a few more little houses around. She built a few houses also. So she.
yeah, I don't know about that. I have to look that up. So she evidently had pretty good credit with some of the people because they had so much land. And
so
it's too bad they lost all that. I probably would have been another Nikki Hill.
yeah. So, do you think if we didn't lose all that property, if this didn't happen, if the fire didn't happen, where do you think our family would be today?
Well, if the fire hadn't happened, I expect my
Would we be
my
living?
father and mother would have stayed in San Francisco.
Mhm. Would we all be living it up in San Francisco right now?
Yeah, if they had that many hotels, and
Oh, darn.
you know, we'd be in high cotton.
I would. All right.
But they came east. My mother and father, your great grandmother
Mhm.
and father, in 1929, right in time for the Big Depression.
Mhm.
Why did they want to come east?
Well, I think your great grandfather and grandfather got married in Reno, Nevada.
Mhm.
They eloped to Reno from. They both had, I think, 1 or 2 years at the University of California, and then their parents made them have a regular wedding, another one. But I think there was a period in there, I'm not sure about this, but where I suppose jobs were hard to find and grandmother couldn't support everybody. And I think they knew in San Francisco, the Knutsons, Bunky Knutson is a guy that put General Motors together. And supposedly, when my mother and father came east, he was supposed to have a job with General Motors.
Mhm.
But when he got to New York and the Depression had hit, the job was gone to somebody else in the immediate family. So there they were in New York
Mhm.
with nothing, no money and nothing to do.
Uh-huh.
That's when your grandfather started pounding the pavement. And
All right.
I'm sorry.
No, it's
And
okay.
the first person to give him a job was John Sloan at W&J Sloan, the finest furniture store in New York on Fifth Avenue. And
Alright.
he did all the big jobs.
But it's about to run out of time. So, all right. Lots of family drama here. Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you very much for your interview.
Oh, well,
Can you say bye?
I left
Say
a
go,
lot
dog.
out.
It's okay.
Say go dogs.
Say
Huh?
go dogs.
Go on.
Say go dogs.
Oh, go dogs.